Welcome back to the Explicit Measures Podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Explicit Measures Podcast.
How are you, Mike? Another week ahead of us.
Yes, and just to be clear, this is a recorded episode. Tommy and I are traveling, so this episode has been pre-recorded. So sorry, we won't be in the chat window talking to you via YouTube chat at this point. But that being said, it's been good. We've been quite busy, ramping things up. Lots of good work recently. Looking a lot more around projects around Fabric in these recent days. So with that being said, let me just kick off with our introduction to our main topic real quick, and then we'll jump into kind of our news and other beat from the street items if we have any. So today our topic is really going to be around, are we still in self-service mode, or are we actually drifting more and more back towards a corporate BI stance? What we see a lot with Fabric right now, Fabric is adding a lot of corporate, let's call it corporate features. Git integration, we have Tyndall, we have a lot of tracking of code. We're doing a lot of things with like pipelines and automation of data loads. This feels very central BI, and it feels like we've shifted a lot away from, hey, go turn on Power BI, run into powerbi.com, build whatever you want to build, and have at it, right? I think there's a lot of features that are coming out of the Fabric and Power BI ecosystem that are focusing on central teams managing and deploying your Power BI, Fabric, and elements. So I think right now we want to kind of unpack this idea. Where did this idea come from? We have to give credit to where the credit is due. Marco Russo did an interview with Rui Romano on LinkedIn recently, and the link is in the description below, where Marco kind of talks through, like, what does this look like? There's a lot of tools that are proliferating in the marketplace, some that are made for modeling, some that are made for visual editing, some that are made for reports. There's a lot of different things going out. So what does this mean for us as companies? Where do we need to invest our time? What does this look like? Are we going to be required to use all these tools? Do we not need them? So that's going to be kind of the main topic for this episode. Are we just using the word self-service and actually drifting back towards corporate BI? Okay. That being said, Tommy, what else do you have here? Do you have any kind of beat from the streets or any topics?
I do, actually. This has been a fun one I've been working on, and initially tested it out because didn't really see the purpose at first, and now I'm changing my song a little. So one of the things Microsoft recently announced was the ability to take a semantic model and push that data to a lakehouse, which it sounds, and it is counterintuitive to everything that we normally do. We want to ingest data into a lakehouse and then connect to that in Fabric or to a Power BI semantic model. But I have this ability now, anytime my semantic model refreshes, to choose individual tables and push that to a lakehouse, as if that was the ingestion side or the load side. Mike, this is really cool. And I'm doing a few projects on this right now. And dare I say, I'm getting to the point where I am going to stamp my approval on this to say this is absolutely one of the methods that you can use to get data into a lakehouse.
Yes.
And let me just get your thoughts there. Have you played with this at all?
Yeah, we actually have a customer who's actively looking at this engagement right now. And this, I think, extends the experience. So if we think about what you want to do, the Lakehouse is this idea or concept of, we have a table that's physically stored on disk, right? So data flows Gen 2, other things as well. There's opportunities for you to load data into a semantic model. And when that data is locked into the semantic model, it's kind of locked there. You really can't do much else with that data. So we think about the different personas, and I think this is actually going to bode very well for our topic today. If you think about the kind of users you have in your organization, beginner users, maybe intermediate users, and then we have advanced users, right? What types of skills do those people have, and how would they want to interact with your data, right? If I'm a very basic user, I may require that, Tommy, you build me the report. I go to powerbi.com, I look at it, and I'm happy. Like that's all I need, right? That's all I want out of that experience. But if we move up the scale to like maybe a medium level advanced user, right? Well, I don't want to just see the report that you gave me, Tommy. I want to build my own reports. So I want to see the semantic model. I want to see how you made the tables. What are the relationships? I want to use the measures that you produced to build my own report. That's maybe the next level up, right? So now what we're doing is we're exposing part of the semantic model to those users. And then you can go even farther and say, well, maybe you are an advanced user, and we actually want you to look at like, well, go play with tables in the Lakehouse or go get data. So now for those really advanced users, I think there's a really solid use case of you want to get access to the data. We probably want to give you direct access to the tables that are in the semantic model. And you may build something that's convoluted. I may not want you hitting the semantic model and using my compute to do so. So this example here, what you're talking about is we're looking at this experience of if we just automatically synchronize those tables down to the Lakehouse, you can make another Lakehouse with a shortcut back to those original tables. And now I can hand out to the business, okay, well, here's your semantic model. Here's your pretty report. Oh, by the way, all the tables you need in the semantic model, here's a Lakehouse with shortcuts back to the original tables. So as the semantic model is being refreshed, you immediately get a refresh of those tables. I think this is a really compelling story. So, Tommy, I'll agree with you. I think this is a very cool feature. I think initially I didn't quite understand it, but as I think about all of the work, let's put some scale to this, right? We have 30 million monthly active users in Power BI. I would argue many of those users are not actively engaged in Fabric. What's the easiest way to get them to start to use Fabric? Hey, let's just turn on auto synchronize for your semantic model to automatically land those tables in the Lakehouse in lake table format. You now instantly get people wanting to write SQL and notebooks and other experiences that are only Fabric related. This is a great win. I mean, I think the whole thing is strategic for people to like find that it's not Fabric isn't that intimidating. It's an easy product to use. Here's a bunch of tables. You're already loading from semantic models. You can just go use them and build other experiences. And you can now experiment with data, build new reports, make new things, maybe even build new semantic models on top of those same tables, right? And maybe you come back and say, okay, this is a good product. This is actually adding value. Now you can say, how do we incorporate it into our actual process? Does that make sense?
No, there are two light bulbs that went on for me. I was about to say off, but I don't have many light bulbs in my head, but there are two that went on that actually really made this a really viable story. Number one, we're kind of doing data flows in desktop now, and it's Gen 1 data flows.
Yeah.
That's kind of what this acts like. It doesn't live in data flows, but I'm just really doing Power Query. I can have the relationships and the DAX and the semantic metadata does not get past the Lakehouse. It's just the table. Fine. I'm doing my Power Query in desktop. I publish it and it goes to a Lakehouse. But the real light bulb was I wanted to do additional transformations on these tables that I was already doing stuff in Power BI, but I knew data flows couldn't handle it and I knew Power BI couldn't handle it. So I pushed these tables through, and now I have a notebook going to the Lakehouse to do all these additional transformations, create two essential tables that just could not live in the normal model. And now I have a second semantic model, which is part Power BI semantic model, part Lakehouse. And I'm using just a pipeline to refresh it. And those two kind of real stories for me are, I mean, to your point, what a great story for someone who's, I don't want to deal with Python right now, or it's just, we don't have that ability. We have some more governance around this. Well,
yes,
I already have a source of truth, or we're still living in that Power BI governance where Power BI is going to define for us a lot of things that we do. But now I also have it in the SQL endpoint where, again, Power BI is not the end of the road. The semantic model is not your final destination.
Yes.
So to me, again, I'm still at a point, Mike, where from a adoption and administration point of view, where do I place this? How much do I push it? Because this can obviously have some complications with it, because again, you break something in your model, it's going to break a Lakehouse. So, but man, am I leaning closer and closer to this being one of the main stories that I'm seeing in Fabric.
Yeah. So I think this is a really interesting scenario. And if you go, I mean, actually, I'll make sure I try and add the link to the documentation in the description of the video as well here. So you can check out the link in the description here for this particular feature. It's called One Lake Integration for Semantic Models. That's the name of the feature. And if you look at the diagram they put on the website, it's actually really clear. They have a whole bunch of data sources. This could be SharePoint. This could be SQL Server. This could be files, whatever you want, right? and it's going through the analysis services import process, and then it's landing data tables in the lake. And then their example or their diagram here shows you can build a direct lake semantic model on top of those same tables. So there's some really interesting new patterns here that could really enhance this. And if I think about the Excel user, right, I'd rather have the Excel user touch directly the one lake tables than to go through my semantic model and analyze in Excel. And the reason I say that, and there's definitely some needs here where you may want to have measures and things. I get that, I understand. But if the Excel user is going to be egregiously building flat, long, wide tables of information, I'd rather that Excel user use their local Excel compute using Power Query, connecting to the Lakehouse tables, building their own data engineering things on their own, to then not abuse my semantic model. So if you want a curated data set, go to the semantic model that I've already built you. If you want to build your own analysis on top of our tables, go ahead. Here you go. Here's your one lake. Here's your tables inside directly in one lake. You can go get access to them in Excel. So I think there's a really unique story here. And again, this is, I think, really good for our main topic today, which is, is this self-service or is this corporate BI or what is it? So with that being said, I think it's actually a good transition. Let's go into our main topic today. Tommy, frame us out some of this idea here around corporate BI and what does this look like? What are we doing here?
So pretty interesting story here because we've all been about self-service. We did, I think, 2 different separate series on self-service and corporate governance. And that was all in the world of just Power BI. That was Power BI, pure development. Fabric did not exist or was still in preview. And we talked about there's governance, there is the adoption story, the user story, who's self-service. And I think the definition on your screen is really who is self-service. However, we're getting to this point now, Mike, where we're kind of blurring the lines a little, where you have this world of Fabric now where it's easy to get to. Anyone who has a browser can start using Fabric. You don't even have to install anything. However, Mike, we have the problem, or we have the situation, I would rather say, not a problem, where you got to kind of know a lot of stuff. You have pipelines, but there's Git, there's Python, there are pipelines, there are notebooks, there are things called lakehouses and what that flow is. So part of me feels like we're drifting away from Power BI for everyone, 5 minutes to wow, where it's still possible. But I'm going to jump right off, or I'm going to start with a bang here. I think we have 2 definitions now of what self-service is. One that's Power BI and one that's going to be Fabric. And I think the same thing with corporate BI.
This is interesting, Tommy. So let me just give you my perspective. So maybe there is. I'm not going to really, I don't think I'm going to have an opinion on whether or not self-service is Power BI only or Power BI and Fabric. I'm not sure if I'm going to agree one way or the other on this one. But what I would say, though, is if I think about corporate BI, let's define what that is. I think it's much easier to define what is corporate BI and then how does that differ from what self-service is doing, right? So when I define corporate BI, I define there's a central group of users that are serving data to multiple parts of the organization. They're not part of a single department. They might have users that participate in multiple departments. I'm thinking like we have a sales department. I'm thinking maybe we have an operations department, right? There may be representatives of those departments showing up and communicating their needs. Hey, I'm the sales team. I need this marketing data. Hey, I need this data about our customers. Where can we put it, right? Central BI is the team that's in charge of, okay, well, tell us where does the data come from? How do we want to land it? Where do we store it? How do we make sure it's updated and current? It's always correct, right? I think of Central BI as this team that's making repeatable data processes that they can go use. Now, on the flip side of this, corporate IT or corporate BI isn't, right, what I would call self-service. Self-service is I'm now again, back to my olden days of using business objects. A business user would show up to business objects. I would grab some measures and dimensions and put them together, and I would make my own. And let's be real, I wouldn't make my own report. I would build a table of data that I would then export and then go do other things with it, right? So I was getting access to the data, but I was building my own reports, right? So that is the term I think we use for self-service, right? You give me tables and relationships. I understand how they stitch together. And then I build my own reporting, Excel documents, and my tables on my own. That's the self-service part of this.
And important distinction there with the self-service, just to make sure we're very clear here too.
Yep.
Not only am I building, because that happens all the time, but sources or truth or what people define comes also from self-service. So if you task someone to build it, it's not just one rogue person putting together PowerPoint. We as a company have allowed this department to kind of have their own data, and this is what they're reporting on. This is what they're making their decisions on from that self-service side. Because you can have corporate BI and still have people creating things, but I think the difference is, where does the buck stop? And that's really when you actually have that definition. So just wanted to make sure that we're very clear there.
No, I think I like your point there. I think to me, the challenge becomes when I look at what is corporate BI and what is self-service. I think of there's a handshake, there's a negotiation, there's a contract. And we've talked about this in the past about like this concept of like a data contract that moves from some central team out to a department, a person, someone who's not in charge of the corporate BI, but yet they're still being given that data. And I think there's an expectation being given, right? Tommy, if I give you access to a whole bunch of sales and marketing data, and I don't create the reports, I'm not supporting that, right? I'm just giving you, here are the tables of information. When the business has a problem with the reports that you produce, Tommy, I think you should be the owner of it. Like they should come back to you and say, Tommy's the expert. He's the owner of that information, data, or reporting. Let Tommy own that. And I think there's this delegation of responsibility when you look at data. It starts with central teams. It starts with IT. It then moves into lakehouses and tables. And then you hand it over to the business and then they do something with it. And even in the business, they may also delegate responsibility to certain parts of their data. Like I think about master data. Master data is usually owned by many different departments, but it all needs to be collected in one single space. So how do you negotiate that as a company? So I think there's a master data element of this as well that also adds complication to like who owns the information. Does that make sense?
For the realm of our conversations, I cannot help but think about, are we considering in our conversations today or in the topic managed self-service as well?
Oh, geez. Now we're going
to because I don't want to throw a wrench in it, but to me, honestly, maybe it's just because of all the projects I've done the last 3 years have had some point of that. But I mean, self-service almost like it's managed it's just wanting to be managed self-service too. Well, so, or do we want to put that on the parking lot for today?
I would say just for today, that might be convoluting too many different terms all at once. I think I'm focusing more on like let's actually define what self-service is, and let's define what corporate BI is. And to your point though, Tommy, like when we start adding like Git integration, when we start adding deployment pipelines, when we start adding like lakehouses and all this, these are all very traditionally corporate BI owned utilities, tools, SQL servers and the like. Those came from Azure. That's an Azure based mentality. They're now being brought into Fabric, they're coming to Fabric, which is being used right next to Power BI, which I think is the right story. This is the right story. You want Fabric and Power BI to play very well together. But I would argue now you have blurred, to your point previously, there's two self-service modes. There's Power BI self-service and there's Fabric self-service. What does this look like? And I think you're right, Tommy. I think we're in a new place here where Microsoft is making data engineering a commodity so easy that anyone can do it. And because of that, we now have this new problem. How do we manage the self-service side of things in the Fabric world? I think we're still focusing more on corporate BI.
I think that's where we should focus here or at least really jump into the conversation. I've said this for a few times on the podcast, where a lot of things in Fabric, I wish there were more pop-ups and alerts, because one of the, I think, campaigns that Microsoft is doing is they want Fabric to be dead simple to use. And it is. I honestly think.
Oh, it's way better than Azure.
Yeah.
Even just from provisioning. I mean, dude, the fact that I can go in and just click, new SQL server, give it a name, and the thing just starts. Like, to me, that's the ease of which I needed to do things inside Azure. It's just not that easy. Like, it's just more difficult to configure. Like, I have to go all through all these configuration screens, and I have to know like what region am I putting it in, which resource group. I got to figure out how much it's going to cost me. In the Fabric world, I don't care about any of that. I just literally give it a name. It just shows up and it just works. A lot of the bells and whistles behind the scenes are just being handled.
Yeah. And I'm already dealing with workspaces. And to be very frank, if you were to say, give me a full data stack system with all data products imaginable and make a UI for it, I don't know what else I would do to the user interface, like, or what they've done to make it that much better. It's pretty dang good. But the problem to me, or the deceiving part of this, is, Mike, you and I go in there. Obviously, we get it. We already work in Azure. But if you want this to be, again, the persona for self-service that you mentioned, this is not your full stack developer. They probably maybe they've heard of GitHub, but they're probably more on Microsoft Office and PowerPoint and, you know, other simple based tools. They're not developers. They're not developers at the end of the day.
Even just talking about dev, test, and prod environments, I think most self-service users are not thinking that way.
Right.
All right. I mean, I'm not thinking when I build a report, I should build a version of the report that's a development report that I'm working on. I shouldn't think about, okay, now I'm going to go give it to somebody else, version to test, and then I'm going to go to prod. Like, as a self-service person, I'm just building whatever I can on top of the data that I have access to and be done with it. Like, I don't think that mentality exists yet. Now, some organizations might be more mature in this area than others. But then as soon as you introduce the concept of environments, are you actually even doing self-serve anymore? Are you actually, because you're now building a product for somebody else and you have the ability to like roll back and you have testing and like, I'm not sure we're in that self-serve market anymore. I think we've graduated into like a more robust solution. And I think, to your point, Tommy, this is where Microsoft, I think, is not struggling, but I think a lot of large organizations are driving the features that are coming into Fabric and Power BI. And those large organizations are thinking with corporate BI mindsets, right?
And you brought up the methodology because I was going straight technology. And I think those are the two critical hurdles that we have to figure out right now for self-service to work with Fabric, is getting past the technology or understanding what self-service should do in the technology. But to your point, which dare I say is probably a little more imperative here, is the process, right? Because you could do Fabric with just going into workspace, creating everything, and that's what's in production. You don't want to, though. And it's going to push that Git aside, and it's going to push all of that really best practices around, even if you just said dev and prod, where again, that can be just, these are foreign words. So we have technology and we have process that we have to figure out what that means for self-service. I'm going to quickly, go ahead.
I want to react to your point there that you made. I think you made a point around you're throwing away the Git and the process of like maybe dev, test, prod, right? So
I would never throw it away, but
not throwing it away, but I'm just saying, like, to the business user, I think what they're looking to deliver is, I have a problem. I'm trying to deliver value right now to solve that problem. That's what I like as a business user showing up to do something. I'm solving this issue. I'm not thinking about how do I sustain that answer or solution over a longer period of time. Again, I want to go back. This is a blanket statement. You know, most business users are doing that. They're building one solution right now to solve a problem. They're not thinking about how do I build versions of that solution? How do I build dev, test, prod of that solution to like make it sustainable? But I think that's maybe one of the larger distinctions between what is corporate BI and what is self-service. Is one is building for sustainability and one is building for results. Now they're both trying to build results at the end of the day, but one, when you're talking corporate BI, you are kind of agreeing, or you should be agreeing to some sort of data contract, right? I'm corporate BI. I'm going to make this report every day. This data will be refreshed at 6 a.m. ready to go. Boom, done, right? That's your contract back to the business who can go use the data. When you're in the self-service side of things, it's not necessarily the same thing. Mm-hmm. I have my Excel file. I'll refresh it when I want, whenever I want. I've got my visuals that I'm going to refresh my report. I've seen people do crazy things. Like some users didn't understand how to make one single table for all months. And I saw them building in Power Query one table for every single file for every single month, and then merging all the tables together at the end. Like that's what self-service does. They don't know any better. Like, so they're just building what works and then using that to make decisions, which is fine. That is required to move the business forward. When I see things like that, I immediately think to myself, there's something missing at the data culture level in our organization that is causing people to work on these ad hoc one-off solutions and causing so much extra work.
Well, I think the biggest thing with self-service and when it's successful is a lot of the projects are things that I don't want to say they would just be tedious for the central BI team, but this was my life back in the day where I was corporate BI, and man, we did everything under the sun. We eventually moved to a little more self-service just because all the requests we were getting were ad hoc projects or simple weird data things. And we realized short-term, long-term. And that was the big decision that we made, because we could fix this one thing for you and get this Excel file, yada, yada, yada. But guess what? They came back a week later because it was never sustainable. So a lot of times when corporate BI takes something over, which happens a lot with self-service, it's because everyone realizes it's worth the investment. It's going to take longer to get implemented because we just can't take your Excel file and make a pretty report out of this. We realize that we need something, again, that has a long life cycle because people are looking at this every day. We can't do the same thing every week where, hey, did you update that formula? Okay, BI can't do anything until you update that formula or something's broken. So a big part of this too is when corporate BI does come into play, it's because it's worth that investment for that data. I think a lot of times the data that self-service is dealing with, at least from the start, is ad hoc. It's, it could be someone's making their sales quote in an Excel file. We'll use that. We'll create a Power BI report off of that. But to me, Mike, there is this kind of jump to where self-service eventually wants to become or wants its data in the corporate BI world. It just doesn't know it yet. Like I want to be able to report myself. And I think Power BI works so well as self-service because I could do my reporting. You want a bar chart? Cool. Corporate BI doesn't deal with that. Just take our semantic model, take some of that extra data, and you can build Power BI in the browser or in the desktop, but you can use that. But this is now the question with Fabric, because if self-service works so well with Power BI, because what were they doing? A little Power Query, but I would challenge it's mostly report design, report building. Okay. What are you doing in self-service in Fabric? And I'm asking you that. So like really, with all the products available for that person, what are you really doing self-service in Fabric? You're not doing notebooks. I wouldn't, if you disagree with me that, let's dive into it. But I don't imagine that person has that skill set. Maybe you have Copilot available to you, but that's intimidating. Maybe you're doing data flows Gen 2, but we've talked about that. Maybe you're doing pipelines and going to that. Again, if you want to have the most use of that, you're either using a notebook or variables. So what are you doing in Fabric that we're going to call self-service?
So before we go down to that, I'm going to write in the question because I do want to come back to the question. I want to go back to your question here, Tommy, around, you made this note around, like, in your company, you're looking at, sure. So you were doing a lot of corporate reporting. Corporate reporting kept getting bigger and bigger, right? There was more ad hoc requests. People in the business didn't understand how to engineer their own data and get value from that information. So what was happening was those requests were coming back to central IT, your team, and you were realizing the volume of requests we're getting, and because the data, to me, what I'm going to read between the lines here, right? The reason your central BI team was getting more requests was because data culture was becoming more important to your company. You, like, everyone was needing more access to more data. Great. That's the right problem to have. The downside was there wasn't anything that corporate BI was doing to educate the broader audience around what is self-service. And instead of the users building their own bar chart or loading their own data, they had to continually go back to the central team and say, look, I can't do it. I don't know how to do this. Hey, Tommy, can you build the bar chart? Can you build the table? Oh, and by the way, here are my requirements. So I think, again, my question back to you, Tommy, was, as your company transitioned from corporate BI to self-service, what were some of the initial actions? And I'm asking this question knowing what I think you did. I'm going to confirm my suspicion, but what are some of the initial actions you did as corporate BI to start lifting those self-service needs back to the business? Like, just what did you do? What was the starting point?
It was support, training, and ownership were the three kind of big areas.
Okay.
Right there. So no, and I think we're spot on here.
Okay.
We had a setup. I know you got a point. Yeah, I'll let you go. So
so this is why I want to come back to. So that's exactly the right answers I wanted you to say, right? I wanted you to say, look, corporate
I'm
BI.
not an MVP for nothing, man.
True statement. You know what you're doing, but the reason here is, Tommy, you're aligning with my expectations, right? So when I move a workload out of corporate BI and I give it to the business, we need to start with, how do you support it? What is the training you need to go use, right? I'm not just going to go give you business objects and say, okay, now you build it. You're going to start by saying, hey, we're going to introduce this new tool. We're going to have some transition planning. We're going to bring in key leaders who are going to need to build reports and teach you how to build the reports. Same thing for Power BI, right? If Tommy was building all Power BI reports to begin with, you're not just going to give people Power BI desktop and say, all right, go build your own stuff. Have at it.
5 minutes a while. Bye-bye. Yeah. So.
You could do that, but I would argue that's not going to go over very well. And you're going to get a lot of trash that's made. So instead, corporate BI should be focusing on not necessarily building every report, but rather creating a forum, and, to borrow a term from our good friend James Bartlett, building your own data dojo, right? You need a community of practice around, how do we build reports? What kind of data sets will corporate BI support for you? And you as the business unit, what can you do? Now, the reason I bring up these points is, you talked about support. Awesome. That just means when people have questions, you help them. You talked about training. Awesome. That's teaching them how to feed themselves, teach them how to fish, as opposed to giving them a fish. And then you talked about ownership, which is what I talked about at the very beginning, which was this handoff between, I'm going to give you this table. What happens to it after I give it to you, that's your responsibility. If there's a report that you build and it's something wrong, I'm not going to answer the question. Instead, I'm going to refer the business or the IT ticket to you because you own that thing, right? So that's a negotiated contract between Central BI and that team. Okay. So all of this to say, I'm going to now go back to what you're saying. Your question was, Tommy, which was, okay, what are you doing today that is self-service? What self-service things can we actually do today that we would define as true self-service? All right.
I want you to eliminate Power BI based products or methods in this. I don't. So the question for you is, what are you doing in Fabric? That would be self-service for the person, not just what could you do, but realistically.
Okay. Good question.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let me just give you some tiers of what I think that can be used here. So I think you want to look at your user's skills capability as a spectrum, right? On one end, we have, I can only handle reports that you give me. That's it. You're going to give me a report and I'm going to use it. Let's say on the other end of that spectrum, I know how to write SQL, right? So I think there's a skill variation across those team members, right? I may focus on, so if we're talking on the skill side of things that are, you give me a report and I'll use it. You build me a pagina report and I'll use it. If that's your skill set, your self-service is limited to only, you can go to the report, change a filter, and then download. That's it. That's all. That is self-service. But there are other users who have a lot more knowledge and they have a lot more, let's call them skills or data engineering skills that they can use to go do their own things. So let me give you another example. Semantic Model gets imported. We then land those tables in the Lakehouse, right? And now I give someone else the experience of like, hey, here's all the data tables inside the Lakehouse. I'm going to shortcut you a whole bunch of tables you can go touch and go look at. Go use a SQL Analytics endpoint. Go use a data warehouse to go query that data. Do joins, make tables, build your own things, right? So I do think there's a skill set here where you could give additional users skills around SQL, writing their own SQL, writing that against tables, because as the business, I'm drawing the line in Fabric that says, I'm willing to give you these tables business, you self-service your need beyond that. And whether you write those tables in SQL or you go into analyze in Excel, that's on you. I'm stopping my level of responsibility at that shortcut in the Lakehouse. And so there's also a skill set of like the expert level person who's like, okay, I'm actually going to do regression analysis. I'm actually going to go do, clustering or other things. And that may be a skill. So some businesses will hire that skilled of a person for their business unit. There will be people in the sales and marketing team that are super sharp and may even have a computer science degree in that department. 100%. Like I would guarantee you that exists. So in lieu of that, that user may be purely writing Python notebooks against data. So I think it really depends on the skills that the users have of what defines self-service for them. And now, Tommy, I think the question really becomes, okay, it's not necessarily whether or not it's self-service or not. It's a matter of who needs to own the output of that product. Is that product that self-service person built, is that a product that they're going to be reusing every month? Or was it a one-off? Right? Because I don't think central IT wants to be maintaining a whole bunch of one-off reporting things. I think central IT would be better use of their time is to find what reports are regularly being used over and over again and making those automated and owning those larger tasks, right? Central BI needs to build one thing that affects as many people as possible to make the spend worth your time. When you're self-servicing, you're likely building a lot of one-off solutions, and that's not a good candidate to go put back to central BI.
1,000%. I'm going to challenge you real quick because
yeah.
I'm going to venture to say that all the scenarios you just put out for Fabric are secretly disguised as are really managed self-service. Because, and this is the reason, where does it start? Each of the scenarios you talked about started with BI creating and establishing what? The tables, the data. Then the build off, the spin off from there, the branches from there is the self-service side of things. But you can say the reporting stops with the self-service, but the tables that need to get refreshed and managed and ingested, that's coming from BI in the scenarios that you put. So I agree with you, but I think there's a big point here that we're dealing with Fabric. Unlike Power BI, where I say, you know what, you own your marketing data. That means you are getting Power Query in the Excel files. Like BI is not touching it, but you're owning your MailChimp data. You're owning your Google Analytics data. But all the scenarios here are required, at least initially, are requiring BI at least to create the Lakehouse or set that up. But again, if they set it up, they're also managing it. Corporate BI or this whoever that source, because again, we are not expecting self-service to have that knowledge or the ownership to be able to manage the source data in the Lakehouse, at least in these situations, because of the skill level. Like I said, I can connect to a notebook and I can build a report, but these are all Lakehouse based data. I have not tasked self-service with create your Lakehouse and then ingest the data. How do you ingest your data? So there's a big difference, and that then you're just wearing BI thin. Because all of those scenarios, you also need support training and those areas. So I'll stop there, but just the idea here, Mike, where
I like where you're going with this one. I think where I'm struggling is, I think when you say self-service BI, I don't think you can even use the term Fabric in that, honestly.
And
so you were saying things, and I'm trying to, in my mind, justify what you're saying against what I'm kind of communicating. I think actually what I was communicating, as I'm unpacking what you're describing now, I think I was actually describing self-service data engineering. I think I was actually describing managed self-service data engineering. So there's self-service BI for, and again, I would argue let's talk about self-service BI. Self-service BI is someone gives me some tables. Self-service BI starts, or managed self-service BI starts when I'm building my own semantic models, I'm building my own measures, and I'm building my own reports. To me, that's self-service BI, right? Someone else is giving me the tables and I start from there and move forward. Cool. Let's take that same concept and overlay it into Fabric, right? So in Fabric, we have this similar concept, right? There's this idea of, can I build my own pipeline? Can I build my own table? Can I build my own Lakehouse? And I think there's a new concept you're introducing here, which is actually self-service data engineering.
I don't know.
versus BI, because most of what Fabric is not. So most of what Fabric, the tool, is doing, Fabric is data engineering and data science. It's not business intelligence. It's the stuff that comes right before business intelligence, right? So again, if we think about like the spectrum of like what self-service or central IT or corporate BI is doing, right? We're probably talking about semantic models and reports. But now Fabric has introduced lakehouses, table storage, SQL servers, real-time analytics, like all these other things that are going to help you build data engineering experiences. But is it self-service? Is it not? Do you give the business unit the ability to go grab their own MailChimp data, suck it down to their own lakehouse, and do their own process? They could own that. And that would, to me, that would be a self-service DE experience for them. There also may be a self-service data science experience as well. So I think really what blends here is, which part of those roles need to come under the lens of corporate management or not. And I would argue like there might be some very large systems such as SAP or Oracle or NetSuite, right? All these products are like potentially corporate owned, corporate run, and corporate managed. And the data to get out of those systems should come from that central BI or central corporate team. And then now you have the decision as to what other data sources do you have, and should corporate BI own them, or should it actually be owned by the business units? And that distinguishes between self-service D versus corporate data engineering, right? I think the in my mind here, I'm thinking there's a parallel between what we see in Power BI for self-service and what we see in the other experiences in Fabric for self-service.
We try to divert managed self-service, but we're running back to it. And honestly, what you just said is what I think is going to be the common story.
I agree.
When Fabric comes out, but that's much closer to managed self-service, where any corporate-based data, if it goes across departments, if it's a source of truth, is something vital to the company, not just to a single department, that data is ultimately owned by a corporate team, a centralized team. Now, there can be branches off of that for, again, ad hoc situations. We want to do, to your point, we want to say our best customers. We want to have an ongoing trends. We want to connect this to something else. Fine.
Sure.
But that's a branch, right?
But that should be up to the business unit to decide what additional supplemental data I'm bringing to it. I think what in my mind, I'm having the epiphany of like the semantic model, because I can build a semantic model across multiple direct lake tables, right?
Yeah.
Great. Here's a lakehouse that is all managed by corporate IT. That's your central data. Oh, and you can go forward from that and say, I'm going to even centrally manage the BI, the semantic model, and the reports. That could all be corporate managed. But anywhere along that chain, you could start giving direct or metered access to those tables to let the business unit build out what they need. And I think that's the power of this, is you can now very closely blend what large tasks does central teams need to own, and what non-central tasks, or what are one-off builds or scenarios, or like things that are just not it's too expensive, and we can't wait to get the MailChimp data incorporated. We can't wait to get the Salesforce data incorporated, right? That's something that only the sales team needs to look at, right? If the sales team is taking on the responsibility, they may say, look, we can't wait for you, corporate IT, to do it. Let us own it. That should be okay. We should have a corporate culture that allows business units to build what they need to, full well knowing that in doing this, if it fails, that's on you, business unit.
Yeah.
That's your problem. You'll figure out how to do it, right?
So in theory, I agree with you, but I'm laughing because of all my experiences, at least with sales, right? Where they're like, no, we got it. And then as soon as something breaks, they're like, what did you do? This is broken. We need to update that, especially sales. And if you work,
especially sales,
bless your heart kind of thing, because what a crowd. No, but I think there's a big thing here too.
Well, that's okay. That's okay though. I think the idea, well, I think it's frustrating to them, but that would
trust though.
But that's the risk they took on by owning that part of the process. So I think that conversation comes in, right? Yeah. This is where your chief data officer or your CFO or CTO, they need to be the one having these conversations in here. And so there should be the one negotiating between that sales department and corporate BI and say, look, sales department, you said you couldn't wait. You built something and it was utter trash. Do you want us to come in and fix it? We can spend time, but here's the commitment that the organization is going to make back to you. We can do it. Here's the project. We're going to make it work.
You are so far.
And they have to delegate the responsibility back to corporate again.
Mike, the company you're describing is a case study in a white paper from Microsoft. That is so far down on the maturity side of things. When that's the case, most people are never going to get the, hey, you know, that thing that happened that I said I was going to do and I was going to own it. It's on me. Why it's broken. No, it was, can you fix this? And then maybe a thank you. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're the data person on Central BI and at some point in the process you're involved, guess what? At the end of the day, unless you, again, are on the far end and well into a healthy data culture, there's ownership that we have to take. So what I'm trying to get at here, I think the bigger point I'm getting at here is we're really shifting to a place now where I think that centralized team, and again, I like your idea here of expanding it than just BI. It is also data engineering.
I think
you know what? I think BI is going to be under an umbrella. It kind of makes sense now with Fabric, but I think that team, self-service with Fabric is going to look more like managed self-service than it does look like self-service today. I think there's just going to be, because here's the thing, I could support a lot of people learning Power BI for the first time and helping them with some DAX and helping them with some, Power Query or report. Now, if I have to also support everyone who wants to create a data flow, wants to create a notebook, wants to create a lakehouse, and I am BI is going to be spread too thin to do anything of value.
Okay, so here's I'm gonna argue this point. I'm gonna disagree with you here, Tommy.
All right, let's do it.
So, in order to roll this out, right? I think so. In the same way, your company took on the role of like building self-service things for Power BI by adding support time, by adding training documents and training videos and training things, and then clearly outlining who owns what things, right? I agree with you. I think when you start out for the first time, that business unit will struggle. There will be challenges. They will build things that are not efficient, and they won't be great. But how else will you ever educate them? How else will you ever get them moving forward with building things unless you let them try and fail and learn from it? So I do think your time and portion of how you handle support back to that business unit around the data engineering, I do think you want to do this. I think you maybe run them through the library of documentation that Microsoft has, make sure they get certified in something, right? There may be like a DP 600 or a DP 300 or some kind of exam that you require people to get through before they can even touch Fabric, right? I think that's a fair requirement so they understand where the users can get help and what they need to do. Because I do agree, Tommy, one central BI team will not be large enough to take on all the self-service of BI and all the self-service of data engineering as a whole item without delegating more of that. You might have to hire a dedicated person that handles a lot of support. And I hope the starting of this phase is there's probably a lot of support very early in the process. But as the team and the business unit learns how to do it and works out their own problems, hopefully they're learning and educating themselves to the point where 6 months, a year down the road, you're helping them less and they're more sustaining on their own and building their own stuff. So I do think you're right. It will be very intensive. I think you have to be strategic and plan for it in the early stages, but I don't think it's something you want to shy away from. And I don't think it adds. I think if you just say no, we're not going to do it and never turn it on for people, I think you shortcut yourselves. I think you're going to have a lot of dissatisfied enterprise customers, and Microsoft is intentionally building products that are going to be easy to use. That's the goal. Everyone should do data engineering. Everyone should be able to do Power BI building. Everyone should be able to do some level of data science. Microsoft wants that for every user in the organization. That's their message. And so I think as teams, we have to figure out how do we balance that with our data culture, and how do we understand what are the skill gaps between corporate team that knows how to do this, and people on the team that do not know how to do this.
So I'll give a scenario when we were starting the self-service campaign, and we'll see how much this applies, I think, to your scenario here where, and
Sure.
if I'm going to make sure I heard you correctly. So you said for self-service, we want people to get a certification. We want them to go so many hours of training go through our support, right? If they're going to do self-service in Fabric.
Yep.
So there's a similar idea when we decided to do more self-service around our corporate BI team, where we discussed the threshold, so to speak, where we wanted everyone to do it, but we also didn't want everyone to do it, if you know what I mean. Where
Correct.
it was more the
not
idea
day
where,
one.
not on day one, but more importantly,
Yes.
here's the thing. It wasn't just we want people to create reports, but we realized the problem early. And when we became such a solid centralized team was the idea of trust, because if anyone can create a report, then they can put anything on a page and people are looking at that. They don't know who created it. So there's this trust issue. So we are also very conscious of threshold if someone actually get into Power BI and start publishing things. Now with Fabric, we're talking about compared to Power BI, which was, I'm going to call it dead simple to use. It was pretty dang simple to get some Excel tables, and it may not look great or from the back end, but I could create something. We're either dealing with right now something in Fabric where the amount of people who are going to be doing self-service is going to be limited, because Mike, at the end of the day, with AI, until AI is prolific in Fabric for every need and comprehensive, which we know we're still getting there and we probably will, I can't expect the other team to get a certification unless that person is more dedicated, and that's more closer to hub and spoke than it is self-service, right? Because it's not everyone. It's not everyone. If that's the case, if this person has to do dedicated training, take a certification, right? That's a dedicated person that just becomes a branch of centralized BI.
So don't see a problem there.
Okay, neither do I. But I just want to.
The skills of that person need to be at a certain threshold, no matter what. Doesn't matter what you do. Like it doesn't matter if they're central BI or not. Like if you're gonna open up pipelines and data flows and data flows Gen 2 and notebooks and lakehouses, like there's a certain level of understanding that I would expect that the other even self-service business users should understand on how to use those things, right? So, that if they don't know, it's the business's prerogative or business's requirement to make sure those individuals have the knowledge they need to do their job effectively, have the knowledge to do things to a standard by which we say things are good. One thing is, you mentioned trust around self-serve items. I do think this is very important. I think this is immensely important here, but I believe you can solve some of those trust issues with providing a method of weeding out the trash in that system. So that would be, these items can be certified. These data sets can be certified. These workspaces are certified, right? Define what certified means. Define what trust means in those situations. So this is an action that you take with the business, and you say, okay, we are going to define something that is certified. Here's requirements that IT thinks should be in place, or central BI or central engineering. These are requirements that we think are in place to make sure that this is certified. Business, is there anything that you care about that we're not describing that means certification to you? And so the goal is to get them to buy into this. And that way, when someone says, hey, I'm going to build an item, the question at any part of the organization should be, is it certified? And there should be a known culture, a known stamp of approval that everyone can say, if it's certified, I should trust it. And if I don't know if I can trust it, there needs to be at least a contact person for that certified item to go back to say, hey, Tommy, you built this certified report as a self-service individual. I'm having some questions around it. Who can I respond to get those questions answered? That's where trust comes from. So to your point around trust, I do agree it has to be there, but I think you can solve it with other processes and other parts of the Power BI ecosystem that let you certify things that you need to do.
If you listen closely, Mike, and really be quiet, you can hear the slow drum beat of Fabric Managed Self-Service, SMSS, because it's coming. And here's the thing, though. Two things we haven't discussed yet, which I think will be absolutely for a future episode. And I'm loving this, by the way, is all we've talked about to this point is really the governance and support side of self-service and Fabric. Two things we have not critically discussed that are, I think, going to be imperative too is we know that, and this is going to be close, more or less my closing thought. I think other things we need to consider as we get closer to organizations getting to self-service. What processes do they intake that are part of Fabric or part of corporate BI, such as Git, such as pipelines? Are we incorporating that into their process? And also to the admin side, because guess what? We also know we're dealing with a capacity here. And it's not just create at your own, your own fund, but we got to also manage that too. So there is that limited amount of ability. So what does adoption of the center of excellence look like in Fabric for self-service? So those are the two things I'm going to say that we're going to talk about later is what processes and when do we incorporate them into the real workload of process in Fabric? And again, what does the center of excellence look like for managed or for self-service in Fabric?
Yeah, so I'm going to probably maybe end on this thought here. So I think what I kind of came to this epiphany of is there's this concept of like semantic models, Power BI, and reports. I think there's a good use case around self-service around that space. I think I'm of the opinion you should enable your business to build lots of things. You also need a process to be able to groom the cream of the crop off the top of whatever is being built. But I definitely think there needs to be a process, something around how do you identify what content is being used most frequently, who's using it, and which content needs to be maintained and always running. There's a couple reports, not even a couple. There's many reports maybe that are essential to running your business. Do you know where those are? Mm-hmm. Do you know how to fix them when they break? Those are the questions that Central BI, I think, takes on to make sure that those reports are always on and running. So I think, and my standpoint here is like, look, there's going to be self-service both at the Power BI level, and there's also self-service in the data engineering level, and there's also self-service in the data science level. So if we look at those different spectrums of things, I think there's self-service in all those areas. What I think I'm leaning on is how do you identify trust and how do you pull the best parts of all those teams back into something that is sustainable and run in a regular fashion? What should Central BI actually be owning versus the businesses? So I think it was just some good data culture discussions. I think really discussing about process and how you certify things and who owns what. I think you could actually get really far with a lot of good self-service across many aspects of Power BI and Fabric. And I'm very encouraged that Fabric is very easy to turn on and use because it makes Tommy and my job really beneficial. We can do lots of consulting around helping organizations figure out what this pattern looks like and how to build process around this. Okay. That being said, I think this has been a good topic. Thank you very much for listening to this hour of conversation around self-service, managed self-service, and then Fabric and where this fits. That being said, we do appreciate you listening to the podcast. We'd love for you to share this podcast with other people as you unpack what self-service means to your business and how you may incorporate some of our thoughts here into your process. Tommy, where else can you find podcasts?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. And share with a friend since we do this for free. And do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast, leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of Power BI Tips social media channels.
With that, thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.